Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piss. This is a Frontline update for the 13th of February 2025. Just want this to be a relatively quick one. There aren't too many blue pins on the map today, it has to be said, but then it's relatively quickly since I last did my Frontline update. In fact, it was the 11th, now the 13th, so this is less than a 2-day update. And yeah, there are some, quite a few purple pins, or not that many actually, but they don't signify huge gains for the Russians either. So I think we're still in the same sort of situation we were the other day when I was saying that the Russians are looking like they're culminating, or at least in certain areas of the front line, they are certainly not able to attack at the same rate of intensity that we had previously seen. I want to just dip into this this thread by Playfra. It's quite a detailed thread of certain areas on the front line, and I just think it's useful to give ourselves a sense of what's going on. So we're going to start on the Prokrosk front, so let's put that on my map here. That is most of the way down this eastern front, and then we're coming over to here, where, if you remember, the Russians are creeping closer to the T0504 and a proper interdiction of that highway from Konstantinivka down to Prokrosk. But we have the Ukrainians pushing back in the Pischane area and as well the Kreminna area too. No changes to the mapping, particularly a couple of small movements there. In the Pischane area. That's where we're going to start. So as you can see from this map, quite a few fortifications behind where the Russians are. And if we zoom in here, the reason why it has been fairly stable along this part of the front is because some major fortifications exist that the Russians have struggled to get over, and that's where they've been held back here. Instead, the Russians, once they got over this area of the front line and were able to come round the side, they've been able to go north and try and get around the Ukrainian problem here. But the Ukrainians pushing back in Pischane and Kreminna up here, so trying to make it hard work for the Russians to do what they're doing. So this source says on the Prokrosk front, Russia can't keep up the pressure anymore and were forced to downscale their offensive efforts. Ukraine is exploiting this by counterattacking in the many places along the sector while fortifications are being strongly reinforced. With a novelty, great use of barbed wire. Okay, so we are then going to go from there to Dachny and Andriivka. So quite stable around there. Now it's down to this area just around Kurakova. So Kurakova has fallen. The Ukrainians now are very much under pressure in Dachny. Andriy Perpetua still has some grey zone in Dachny. Surat Maps has the Russians controlling all of it and indeed taking some land to the south. Moving also inside Andriivka here, according to Surat Maps, with some fairly substantial changes northeast of there, as according to Andrew Perpetua. So that's what we're going to talk about in this part, and that's Konstantinopil there. Andriivka is this one with quite a few roads running through it. You got Oleksivka over there, Zeleny Kut, Bahatir, and Rozliv there, and Zelenivka here. So these are the names of the towns we're going to be dealing with, Dachny as well. Okay. So, this is the most difficult part of the whole Prokrosk front. So, this source still calls this part of Prokrosk. I wouldn't, but there you go. Russian forces pressure Konstantinopil constantly, but are always repelled without changes. And by the way, this is a couple of days old now, but still, I think, relevant. Zelenivka, south of Ulakli, reportedly changed hands twice today. In the morning, the Russians captured the village, but the Ukrainian counterattack was able to clear part of the village in the afternoon. The destruction of 2 Russian tanks and 3 MTLBs is reported there. Russian forces are also attacking east of Zelenivka on the opposite bank of the Sukyi Yali River. Extremely harsh fighting is ongoing. Okay, so Zelenivka is here. Zelenivka, that's the Sukyi Yali River coming up there. So that has swapped hands twice in a day just the other day. And there is now fighting, really harsh fighting over there. In Dachny, the Ukrainians still control the southwesternmost corner of the town. Nonetheless, the Russians started accumulating infantry in the centre for further assaults on the remaining Ukrainian positions in the village and around it. Fighting continues. That's to say that the Ukrainians control the southwestern part of this village of Dachny, as according to this source playthrough. The most difficult situation is in Andriivka, which some sources give as practically captured. Here, the Russians consolidated and secured last week's gains. So this is Andriivka there. So we were talking about Dachny. We were talking about Zelenivka down here. And now Andriivka, that town with a number of roads going through it. The Russians consolidated and secured last week's gains and continue wedging themselves in the town. At the moment, they're trying to fully secure positions on the western buildings of the town. The northern part is still controlled by Ukraine, but north of that, the Russians entered a trench system located on the dominant hill overlooking Andriivka itself, which endangers every Ukrainian position south of it. So that is in this area there. If we just zoom in here, that's the trench system that they are on now in control of largely, and that gives them some serious advantage over Andriivka. The Ukrainians will have to retreat in the very near future from Dachny, so that's here, and nearby positions to Ulakli, that's there, to avoid encirclement, as Kostiantynopil is already being attacked from both sides after the Ukrainians will fall back to the line from Kostiantynopil to Rozliv, so that's over here, that kind of line, before falling back again to the more solid Oleksivka Bahatir Koma line, so that's that kind of line, where they're expected to hold out for some time. Okay, so that's an analysis of what's going on in that area. We're now going to go to Zaporizhzhia area. So let's just put this on my map. So this is Shribne Nadezhdinka, Nadivka, thank you. Some of these place names are particularly difficult to pronounce. Now, this is actually a tad north of where we were. So this is where we're talking about. Ulakli, Andriivka. Just north of here is this small village of Srebina, Zaporizhzhia, actual village of that name, and a number of places here going up to Nadivka, where there's been a little bit of gain there inside the village of Srebina, as according to Andrew Perpetua. Anyway, claim here from this source is that the Russians are clearing the last buildings in the northern part of Srebina and are constantly attacking Zaporizhzhia. After capturing the central part of the town, they moved fighting to the western part, where it's still ongoing. Russian forces are trying to recapture lost ground after the localized Ukrainian counterattack in the forest south of Nadezhdinka, while also trying to capture a tree line that approaches Preobrazhenka from the north, threatening Ukrainian positions in Zaporizhzhia. In picture number 2, the next suitable lines of defense. So there you go. So some ideas of where the Ukrainians might pull back to, but that's the idea that there's some localized counterattacking, possibly around here somewhere, but the Russians are putting some pressure on there as well. And then we go on to Uzponivka, which is somewhere that was, I thought, heavy fighting around there. I thought it was taken. Oh no, silly me. That's the Ukrainian naming of places being the same. So the Uzponivka I was thinking about is down here. It was one of these places up that river that the Russians ended up taking. Remember when it was fighting over Krakova, and you had all of this area still under the Ukrainian control, and then they marched up that river, taking these places. So actually, the Uzponivka being mentioned here, we're going back up the Prokrosk line and actually into this area around Kotlina and Pischany, and actually there's an Uzponivka just down there. And I was talking the other day about how there are attempts to cut the neck off here, coming in through Pischany and fighting over in this area around Uzponivka, but I don't know whether the Russians are now on the attack there. Let's get an idea of what's going on here. So this is Uzponivka to Udachny. That's Uzponivka there up to Udachny up here. So this is our general area of focus. After weeks of extremely harsh fighting, Uzponivka now currently acts as a grey zone. Even though it's possible to define a front line, picture number 3, the Russians were recorded northwest of Uzponivka. And in the basements of the southwesternmost buildings, they're also trying to clear one of the streets and enter another street there. But 3 Ukrainian-controlled strongholds block their way. In the video below, you can see just how ruined the town is after such fighting. And we'll just have a look at that here. So, deep state video there, so I'll leave that playing. After a Ukrainian counterattack in the Udachny mine, Prokrosk VPS-1, the Russians were able to recapture it and gain a foothold in the easternmost residential buildings where they were hit by Ukrainian drones. The Russians constantly try to break the town centre, but break into the town centre, but are always repulsed and forced to fall back. Udachny is extremely important because it's the last big town before the Prokrosk Oblast, and it also acts as a logistical hub. After is the railway, which the Russians can use as what I call an infantry highway, which would be extremely inconvenient for the Ukrainians at the Dnipro border. Again, in picture 3, you can see the most solid Ukrainian fallback lines in the region. These are mostly concentrated behind the pond and in the tree lines and fields covered by barbed wire, especially south of Uzponivka and the southwest of Udachny. North of the latter is a big industrial zone, which also works as a very solid defense node. Okay, so that is to say, it's really important to keep hold of Udachny here, because as you can see, the border there for Prokrosk is very close. And if Ukraine concede this territory and the Russians get into Prokrosk, then they can say they're in another oblast and they'll use that as a really big bargaining chip. So actually what's going on here is very, very important. You got some features like a pond and whatnot to help defend around here. But yes, it is definitely challenging for the Ukrainians. As you can see, some defensive areas, if you want to go into the details of this area, are on show there. And then when we go a little bit further north to Kreminna and Pischany, as previously mentioned, so Kreminna and Pischany just here. Playfar has some information on this area too. So this is one of the most interesting regions here. The Ukrainian Scholar Battalion and other units were involved in a series of successful counterattacks. The southern hamlet of Kreminna was almost completely recaptured there. And reports of Ukrainian advancements north of Kreminna are present, claiming the Russians retreated to the mine northeast of the town. Pischany was also completely liberated, according to Deep State and various Russian and Ukrainian reports, while the Russians are also slowly retreating in mine number 3, just east of Pischany. In general, so you've got these mines around here. I'm not sure exactly where they are, but in general, the Russian spearhead was blunted here. And Russia is discouraged from further attacks because of threats of encirclement and deterioration of logistics. Fierce fighting is still ongoing. Updates are to come in the next few days. So lots of activity around there. And then we come further. Now we're kind of looping round and coming to the south of Prokrosk to a place called Dachenska here. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So Shevchenko to Dachenska, maybe up to kind of Lysivka and Suky Yar. So here we have details. Dachenska to Lysivka. Here too, the Ukrainians are successfully counterattacking and securing the town's eastern part. Here less information was revealed and no geolocations proving this advancement have been released as of now. In Lysivka too, the Ukrainians claim advancements, but there too no geolocations to prove these claims are present for now. More updates to come. So there could be some advances in that area as well as Dachenska, which we recorded the other day, Dachenska. And then we move further on round to the interdiction of the highway. So let's put it onto my map as we come then further up to the northeast. You can see that the T0504 Highway that comes in from Chervonopopivka Yar through Ivaniska, Konstantinivka, and then down to Prokrosk. It is here that it's been under a lot of pressure. There's that junction there that the Russians have attacked a number of times, and it appears that they are getting ever closer to actually controlling that part of the highway. This is the place Vozdvizenka there, probably bastardized that, no doubt. So there to Minorad, which is the city to the east of Prokrosk. So you've got Prokrosk there, and you've got Minorad there. So this is the kind of general area we are talking about. Playfast says, a bit like Andriivka, the edges of the Prokrosk sector are the hottest. The Russians were able to secure positions on the Prokrosk-Konstantinivka Highway exchange, crossing the blown-up bridge and continue trying to advance further north of it. The Ukrainians were able to conduct a successful counterattack in Vodjany Druha 2 and briefly recaptured the meat processing plant, Ukrainian bacon, before the Russians started fighting for it again today. Here, opportunities to stop the Russians are present, as clearly visible from the picture below. Unfortunately, though, Ukraine has a serious lack of manpower here, and the situation is looking quite bad for the defenders. So there has been some counter-attacking around here, the retaking of a meat plant, which is probably that place there. Ukrainian bacon, there you go. You can see that, Ukrainian bacon. So that's a place that was recaptured by the Ukrainians. Don't know if they've managed to keep hold of that. But yeah, having manpower issues in the area is certainly not surprising. Anyway, I think that's a useful little analysis of that whole region. There is also there are also some gains for the Russians, around the Velika Novosilka area, further to the west of there. Not huge, but certainly creeping ever onwards. And then when we come up to Turetsk, interestingly, in Turetsk, that's not what I'm talking about. Where's Turetsk? Up over here. There are some claims that the Ukrainians have actually counterattacked in Turetsk. I think we have Grayskull here saying Ukrainian channel reports that Ukrainians captured the recaptured northwestern parts of Turetsk. So that is in this area. Let's see. We have a whole host of different mine tailings heaps and whatnot. So I'm not exactly sure which one that is in the area, but it could well be around this part. Let me try and find that. Okay, finally found that. It's actually just here. It's this area there. So the Ukrainians might well have retaken that triangle there. That would fall in line with what Andriy Perpetua has anyway, which is this is all grey zone. Surat Maps has that firmly under Russian control. What else does grey? Oh yeah, interestingly, pro-Ukrainian channel reports further Ukrainian advancements in Kamyansk. And this is what I was telling you the other day, that I didn't have any information, but I'd heard claims that there were further advancements. Let's put that on the map before we go finally up to the northeast. We're kind of doing it a bit. We're all over the shop today. Right, so Kamyansk is here, right on the edge of what was the reservoir, but since the Novokakovka was blown up, it looks more like that now. Anyway, weirdly, Google Maps, when you zoom in, it turns it all back to water. So here we see that, or at least Grayskull claims that the Ukrainians have taken this area back there, which kind of broadly fits in with what the mappers have anyway. So not too significant there in terms of changes. You might have a little bit more grey zone here than perhaps Surat Maps is indicating. Okay, so now we're going to go up to the northeast before going up to the Kursk Oblast, the Kursk region. Good news, no changes in Chervonopopivka. It's definitely good to see. Some slight changes, as according to Andriy Perpetua, for Russians south of Bilohorivka. Surat Maps has a very different interpretation there, all around Bilohorivka really, and I'm not sure that that is accurate. I would much rather go for what Andriy Perpetua says there, not because it's better for Ukraine, but because he's just got, I think, a much more robust mapping methodology. Okay, so here around Makivka, between Makivka and Bilohorivka, the Russians have made some gains there. So inching further westwards over the Sherobets River. And then when good news, there are no changes up to Kupyansk until we get north of Kupyansk, and some slight gains for the Russians on the west of the Oskil River. Nothing too serious, to be quite honest, but that whole area here is, for me, a real shame that the Ukrainians have unfortunately allowed the Russians to get across the river and get a really substantial foothold there. When we come past, nothing to note of the Orikhiv offensive there from the Russians. There are some gains here for the Russians on that western side of the Kursk salient up in Russia, with the Russians advancing on Sverdlikovo, and Andrew Perpetua agreeing that actually they've made some pretty substantial gains there. That's certainly something that the Ukrainians will be concerned about, because the Ukrainians themselves are trying to make these gains over Chervonopopivka, Konopelka, and areas like Makhanovka, which now is claimed to be fully under their control. Here we have Grayskull saying multiple channels report that Ukrainians have recaptured Makhanovka south of Zaporizhzhia, a large area of grey zone in that area. So all of this, I think, would be grey zone according to Grayskull, and as you can see, Andrea Perpetua has that as grey zone with the Russians much further back there. But as the Ukrainians are having success over on the east, the Russians are having success over on the west of that sector. So yeah, that's certainly something I need to look out for. And the Institute for the Study of War, just a couple of interesting points in here. Russian commanders are reportedly coercing mobilized personnel to sign military contracts by threatening redeployment to assault companies for meat assaults, highlighting demoralisation and fatigue among Russian forces. We also hear that in the Kursk Oblast, a Ukrainian platoon commander has reported North Korean troops have changed tactics, now attacking in smaller groups of 15 to 20 instead of 50, but they still continue to suffer heavy losses. Other than that, last 24 hours, according to the Institute for the Study of War, having sort of minor changes to the front line there. So a 2-day update, not huge changes, but certainly the Ukrainians under the cosh in a number of places still, and obviously one of the most pertinent being that Kharkiv area, both to the north of Kharkiv going up to Prokrosk and to the southwest. But as far as the northern Prokrosk sector is concerned, here the Ukrainians seem to have kept the Russians at bay, which is really good news. And of course, Chasiv Yar seeing no change is also good news there. Okay, that's enough for me. Thanks for watching. Take care. I really appreciate your support, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.